This week on Rockstar Superhero. Artists are known far and wide as being unintentional narcissists. To be fair, I include myself in this definition because I'm a creative as well. When I heard I was going to be interviewing Jason Blake from Aziola Cry, I was worried because I love the music so much that I feared all I would do is make it clear that if their drummer ever died in a bizarre gardening accident, well, I'd be the perfect fit to replace him. Fortunately for me, Jason laughed that stuff off and kept me on point as an interviewer. The beauty of this particular show is that we get to talk about all sorts of things that make guys like us tick, yet the conversation stayed attainable enough for the musical newbie to enjoy what Jason and his bandmates have to offer. The new album, The Ironic Divide, is available now and worth every red cent you can throw at it. As you're my faithful listeners, I implore you to purchase it today. The links to the band's social media and record labels are included in the notes below. Thanks for letting me ramble a little extra today, and please enjoy my chat with the master of the Warr Guitar, Jason Blake of Aziola Cry, on the Rockstar Superhero Podcast. Jason Blake from Aziola Cry, how are you, brother?
All right, I'm doing well.
Oh man, you know, I say this a lot, but I only have people on the show that I really like. Obviously, I don't know you personally, but I love the band's music. You guys have been around for a while. You're making a statement.
Making a statement, yeah.
Yeah. You know, you. I guess I'll start this way. You have this very disparate release behavior, meaning you put out something, you have these extraordinary expanses of time between albums, it seems anyway. Why is that?
Well, some of it was not intentional, and then there is a part of this that I can actually explain.
Okay.
It starts with when we were looking to do this album that just came out. A bunch of stuff happened on a personal level with all of the members of the band, whether that be having a child, going through a divorce. There was just a lot going on, and that was probably the starting point for pushing things off a little bit. But also, I have to say that it was right around the time where things were very much changing, the way music was released, the way social media played a role in music. And there was a little bit of confusion too at the time, like, what do we do? How do we navigate this? And so that, coupled with all the stuff going on, it just seemed like it was a good time to just settle things down for a little bit, get everything back in order, and come back out when we had a better game plan. And it wasn't just putting something out and knowing that we wouldn't be able to promote it because somebody had this going on, or not knowing really what to do. So I come back to something my mom always told me: everything happens for a reason. And I know a lot of people say that, but I really believe that that's true, because there is a reason why it came out now. We're all in a better place. We all have the ability to promote it and to do the things necessary. And also, I think we also gained a little bit of perspective as to like what the music industry looks like now versus back then.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We could talk an entire show about the things you've just mentioned, because most people as fans don't see that artists, they're not celebrities. They're just people, right? I mean, I get it. Celebrities are people, but there's this assumption that anybody who's in the public eye in any way, shape, or form, if they're recognizable, you know, even locally recognizable, that somehow their lives are these perfect butterflies and cinnamon rolls. You know what I mean? That there's nothing really bad going on because, they've probably got lots of money and they've got women falling at their feet and all this bull crap. and they don't recognize how much pain is behind the scenes. And it's actually good pain because it builds a great artist portfolio as well.
Yeah, I think in this case, it really helped kind of drive the sound of this album.
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you a lot of this music was written during, on a personal level. It was during a divorce. And so I think that darkness is coming out in the music, that what I was feeling while that was going on, definitely play a role in the overall sound. So, sometimes it has its benefits in a way, the things that are going on in your life kind of seep into the music but it definitely had a negative aspect to it, in that we just needed to shut things down for a little bit too.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Are you the primary songwriter, or are you songwriters as a trio?
I am the primary songwriter. I think it all starts with what I come up with on the Warr Guitar. And I think that adds a unique perspective to the music. And then the guys put their stuff on top of that. We've just taken that approach. For us, it works. It starts with me putting basically demo versions of the song down. And what I don't do is dictate what they do. That's purely their creativity and their arrangement kind of. But it starts with the foundation of the Warr Guitar, and it's worked for us, and we continue to do that.
Yeah, man, I love the Warr Guitar. I've never actually been in a band with one, but I love the sound, and obviously it allows sort of almost infinite creative ideas. You know what I mean? It really lets you play with the tones and a different approach.
Yeah, it really starts with a different approach. So and I think when we think about the other guys contributing, it just doesn't have the same angle that I come in from with the Warr Guitar. It just, I started as a bass player, so I have that as my foundation. But when I pick up this instrument, my mind just thinks entirely different. And I think that's the uniqueness of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Did the instrument give you a way to stand out? I mean, was the original thinking, I want to do something that's kind of esoteric? Because I know a couple of guys who play a Chapman stick, for example, and they all picked it because they're kind of oddballs and they wanted to have something that represented their personality on stage.
That's interesting. So I don't think of myself as an oddball, but I can definitely tell you I chose it for a very specific reason. In fact, I was just speaking yesterday about this. So if I take my kind of back in life, I started with piano and then moved to bass. And as part of bass, I was taking a lot of classical and jazz lessons. I have an upright bass sitting right over here. Awesome. And that was really the direction I was heading. And at some point, I just thought to myself, I didn't live the life of a jazz guy. I don't feel like this is really I'm not going to make my mark doing music that I might get good at it, but I didn't feel that life. And so I switched a little bit more to the electric bass guitars, and I was playing in bands doing that. And then at some point I just realized I want to make a mark. I want to do something unique. I kind of felt like, with bass playing even, there's so many great bass players out there. Yeah. Standing out in a sea of great bass players felt a little daunting. And it was at the same time where I was doing a lot of tapping on the bass anyway. So it was the next logical progression for me anyway, was to move to a strictly tapping instrument. But I also had this in the back of my mind that, well, there's thousands of bass players, there's not a whole lot of Warr guitarists, and nope. I could make a name for myself a little easier. I could be a big fish in a tiny little pond, essentially was my thinking. So that's kind of where I started with it. And I started on Chapman stick. I went from a stick bass to which was for me the next logical progression from a bass guitar, tuned similar. And then I moved to a grand stick, which is the 12-string version of it. And then from that, I moved to the Warr guitars. And since I played Warr guitar now, in fact, I'm trying to think that one is brand new. I just received it last week.
Oh my God, I can see them back there. So for the people that are listening and people that don't know what a Warr guitar is, can you give a brief 30-second breakdown?
Yeah, so it's a touch style guitar is what it's referred to as. But basically, it's similar to a Chapman stick, if anybody's ever seen a Chapman stick. Tony Levin, most famously, I would say, King Crimson, Peter Gabriel plays it. But it's a guitar where you have, well, first of all, you play it by tapping the strings instead of plucking or any of the common techniques used with a guitar or a bass. So it's all done by tapping, which is actually I would say, similar to a piano in that way, that you're kind of pushing on the strings. So that would mean that it's set very low so that you can do that tapping technique. And then the interesting thing about it is that it's the tuning is, I think, what throws people off. So the middle strings, which you can kind of see, boy, I've got this totally off.
It's okay.
Yeah, right there. You can see it right in the center there.
Yeah, I can see it.
Those strings that you can actually visualize are the thickest strings. And so you have the lowest strings in the middle of the instrument, which is very different because, on a bass or a guitar, the lowest strings are on the top and they work their way down. So what it is you have a guitar side, the melody side, and that's tuned actually similar to a guitar, tuned in fourths out, but then your bass is tuned in fifths and it's going essentially backwards. So the idea is that your hands aren't crossing each other.
Right.
So you're kind of always moving away from each other. As you go up, you're going away and out.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a little longer than 30 seconds.
No,
that's really what a Warr guitar is. It's a great instrument. It's a beast, though. I mean, even the people. I was just listening to an interview with Trey Gunn recently. It's a difficult instrument and one that is. I don't know to what extent anybody has truly mastered it yet. There's a lot. Right. There's a lot more to do with it.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Trey Gunn, but yeah, there aren't a lot of Warr guitar players. And I was actually going to bring up Trey because even personality-wise, I've talked to him a few times, not on the show, but just personally because he used to live, I don't know, actually know where he lives anymore, but he used to live in Seattle. And so you'd bump into him every once in a while, and your personality is very similar to his in that, it's thoughtful and methodical, right? And curious. There's this really cool way about him that I'm seeing in you. And I would tell you that, yeah, you probably are already a big fish in a very, very small pond. But I didn't know that the strings were set up to not cross, or to not sort of collide with each other with the hands. I always thought it was just, the layout of the guitar,
Yeah, no, that was the original, at least Emmett Chapman's thought behind it. Yeah. Now there's so many different tunings. People use a lot of different tunings. And again, I was just listening to a Trey Gunn interview where he was referring to, especially with the projects, he used the 8th string specifically for that because it was less of a need to have that tuning and all 12 strings on there.
Yeah. Another thing that's interesting about what you said and how you started this interview is you mentioned, jazz and sort of coming up in this, and a lot of people would not understand this if you're not a jazz musician, but it's a very technical environment to be in jazz, right? You have so many considerations. You have, the skeleton of the piece. You have the potential for soloing over particular parts of any given piece, trading ideas with other players. And then there's the freeform improvisational aspect of the whole thing. And yet the Warr guitar adds another difficult, element to the whole thing. So it's interesting that there's only a certain kind of, almost like a crazy person that pursues let's make our life as difficult as possible. So kudos to you for going down that road, man. I mean, I'll get off the Warr guitar thing, but it's pretty rad.
Yeah, no, I could talk about it for hours. I mean, honestly, it's just such a cool instrument that I mean, I've noticed that it's so little sort of history. Mark Warr created it, and Mark Warr has retired essentially from making Warr Guitar. So there was a time when that's whatever he had made, that was it.
Yeah.
But his right-hand man has started working on reproducing them. And so like you can't really tell this is the new one here. It's a little different looking. If you can kind of see even the headstock's a tad bit different. But he's bringing them back. And in fact, that one that I just showed, we used it as taking pictures so that it could kind of get back into the world and realize, hey, this is we're making them again, and this is what's happening. And so I think there's a little bit of a renewed interest now that people are aware that the instrument's back. You can actually get new instruments, and some people are starting to really start to promote it, which is kind of nice too. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a resurgence with regard to it, because for a while it was just kind of like Trey Gunn used it in the 90s with King Crimson, and then it faded a little bit, but it's definitely coming back. So
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Yeah.
No, just that I think that it's great. And so for me, I could talk about this thing for hours. There's so much to it. And like you said, though, it's a difficult instrument to, I think we all kind of strive to figure out what it is that we do best on it. I don't know if there's anybody that really is playing it the same. And I think that's one of the cool things too, is that everybody kind of finds their niche with it and where it works for them. And I think that makes it, again, just such a unique instrument.
So I actually want to say this about the Warr Guitar. One final thing about the guitar. And what I like about it is it's an esoteric instrument, and I can understand why you would want to pursue that. But there's this thing in me that says, I kind of don't want it to make a comeback. Right? Because I mean, from an outsider, from a listener's perspective, it's a lot like being a fan of a band before they broke. Yeah. I kind of don't want people to know that this cool thing exists, because then everybody wants to do it, and then all of a sudden the sort of the cool, the esoteric factor goes away. What's your thought on that?
Never really thought about that, but yeah, you're kind of right. Because I mean, going back to why I said I got into the instrument in the first place, that would take away from that. Once it becomes a little bit more popularized, it loses a little bit of what I was originally aiming to do, which was, make a statement on an instrument that nobody had seen. And it still is the case. I mean, when I play shows, everybody comes up asking, what is that? Or, the question I get oftentimes is, could you put more strings on it, joking around. So they don't quite understand why it looks like it does and why it has the amount of strings it has. But you're right. I think it's kind of, I don't know. I guess I like the fact for Warr guitars themselves, I like the fact that it's coming back and people are buying them. And I think that's a great thing. On a personal level, you're right. Maybe I do want to just remain that bigger fish in the small pond. So I don't want too many people to find out about it.
Yeah. Well, let me say thank you. One of the things I wanted to say right off the bat to you is thank you for pursuing the instrumental music field. And I say this because there really aren't a lot. This goes back to another idea of being a big fish in a small pond. There aren't a lot of guys out there doing what you're doing. But to me, as a drummer, and you don't know this, but as a drummer, that was always my thing. I wanted to hear Return to Forever, and I wanted to hear Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I wanted that approach to music, because I could not care less about lyrical content. And what I've found as a listener, and it was the same when I heard the new record of yours, is the music itself creates this story, right? There's the lyrical content of the notes, of the modes, the things you're choosing. They create very specific moods. And I don't need to be told how to think. The music actually very clearly takes me there. So what's your takeaway from that perspective?
Well, it's interesting, and it's great that you get it. Not everybody does, first of all. I mean, the comments that I even just recently, and whether it be social media or whatever, sometimes we get that this is great. You could use a vocalist, and I get it. For some people that they need that, but that's absolutely not what I'm going for. So it starts with the fact that, what do I listen to? Well, I got to tell you, I listen to soundtrack music. I listen to jazz. I listen to classical, and like the bands you referred to, some of the fusion bands from the 70s. To me, that was always what I listened to. So I don't desire a vocalist. It doesn't even come into my mind, because really what I like to listen to the most is instrumental music. So it starts with that. But then also, like you said, coming from the soundtrack vibe of what I listen to, I like going to see a movie and walking out and thinking about the soundtrack and how much it added to the film. So I think music does that. I don't think you need that vocalist to tell the story. I think the music itself has the ability to do that. And so I just never thought that it required having a vocalist to do that, because and I know, like, some people think, like, well, that's so goofy. You think of this movie in your head and then you start to compose it. And maybe to some people that is kind of weird, but for me, it makes all the sense in the world. There is a film that I kind of think about in my head, and it follows this, ups and downs like a movie would. And so that's where the music takes me. And I need that to kind of compose in a way where I feel like every moment has a purpose. Versus just creating some, nonsensical. And I was thinking about this just today. I mean, there are bands, instrumental bands, where, the title of the song makes no sense. And I like some of those bands too. But for me, it was very much about a story, and the titles meant something, and the songs followed that storyline. Kind of coming back to your methodical sort of, I maybe overthink things.
Sure.
But that's where I come from. So there's very much, everything is in place for a very specific reason. So I like that. And it's kind of how I think. So and the idea of a vocalist just doesn't appeal to me, really.
Where would he fit in anyway? I mean, there's so much going on in the music. If anything, the lyrics, or not the lyrics, I should say, but, adding another melody or trying to find anything that makes sense, you're going to step on a major part somewhere it's going to work, it's not going to work correctly. And then you're going to have to pull back. And then that changes the whole point of Aziola Cry. Right.
That's kind of how I always thought. It was like, even just, I like the idea that we're a trio. I'm trying to make the most amount of noise with the fewest amount of people. And so adding a vocalist would totally ruin that idea. And even adding another instrument into the mix. I think we do a pretty good job of making quite a bit of racket within just three people. So that was always my thinking.
Yeah, there's so many questions that come from all of these thoughts, but I did want to ask you about soundtracks really quick, since you touched on it a second ago. To me, there's two types of soundtracks. There's the classic movie soundtrack, and then there's the modern movie soundtrack. And let me explain. I'll keep it simple. A classic movie soundtrack to me would be something like Apocalypse Now, that's taken, a traditional string approach, a Goldsmith sort of, I'm sorry, I know I'm all over the place here this morning, but like this Jerry Goldsmith thing, right? But then occasionally you have like the flourishes, the Wagner stuff that they do during the, the Fly the Valkyrie and all of that. But a modern soundtrack to me is something like Edward Scissorhands, the Danny Elfman soundtrack. That's my favorite soundtrack of all time. There's something about it that I don't even need to see the movie. I can listen to the soundtrack, and granted, I've seen the movie, but I know exactly what the soundtrack is telling me. in its approach, and it feels otherworldly. There's very much fantasy built into it. What are your two favorite soundtracks?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Well, for starters, one of the things I was thinking about is I think it's amazing when you were saying modern soundtrack. I started thinking about some of the usage of pop music, and I was thinking about how, like, one of the good examples that I use, because they're not the same movie, but if you look at the Godfather series versus like Scarface used popular music at the time. Godfather used, for lack of a better word, classical sort of, the orchestration. And if you watch Godfather today, it still stands. If you watch Scarface and you hear this 80s pop music in the background, it kills it for me. And it's just, it sounds so dated at this point. Yeah. So I always thought that usage of popular music is a horrible idea because it dates your film very quickly. So for starters, I would say that whatever my favorite is, which I have to think about this, is definitely going to come more from that Godfather, more classical type thing. Danny Elfman, I do love a lot of Danny Elfman music. Okay, I could give you one that's just coming to my mind. The soundtrack for Requiem for a Dream.
Oh my God. Oh, yes. I love that so much. I love that movie so much, but the soundtrack is what drives the movie, actually.
Right? Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm a big fan of the Kronos Quartet, and they played a role in that. And then I'm blanking right now, the composer, which I love all of his stuff.
Of
Requiem for a Dream.
Trevor Jones?
No.
Actually, I don't know. I mean, I could look it up, but
yeah, I'm looking it up right now because
okay.
That's going to bother me because that is such a great.
And while you're looking it up, I'll tell you that I shouldn't have said. Oh, yeah. I also shouldn't have said modern soundtrack because, it's only 30 years old. I mean, close to modern might be something like Fight Club, like the Dust Brothers, right? Something like that. And yet that's modern that somehow still works. I mean, that movie's over 20 years old now, but it sounds like a product of the late 90s. It does, but it so works with the theme of the movie that it doesn't distract you where, the Scarface soundtrack is pretty brutally awful.
Right? Yeah. That's what I thought when you were saying modern. I thought that's what you were going to mean. But that Clint Mansell, that soundtrack to me is so fantastic. And I read something about how he created it is he wrote it to be like the movie itself, a requiem. So the music was all meant to kind of follow that of a requiem as the film. And I just think that to me, that's like the ultimate. It's the perfect soundtrack because there's not a moment in that music, if you listen to it from start to finish, that there's anything in there that's, for lack of a better word, filler or no. It's solid from start to finich.
Yeah. Well, the movie's brutal too, and that last 20 minutes is obviously intended to be a voyage to hell. Right. And of course, so it makes sense that the driving, the it's like Mars Bringer of War. It's just taking you into hell. I love that. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Let me talk about the band for a second. The other guys, it's Mike and Tommy, correct?
Correct. Yep.
You have the classic prog trio thing going. You mentioned a while ago you love being a trio. How did you guys end up coming together? Because I've heard, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I've heard you've gone through a few drummers. So tell me a little bit about that story, if you don't mind.
So it starts with writing the music, which became our first album, which was called Ellipsis. I had written this music and was playing with a group of people that the music was different than what we were playing.
Okay.
We were a little bit more world influenced. It was a little bit more improvisational, mixture, kind of a little bit of jazz element in there. There was a cellist even playing with us. And
wow.
then I had written this ellipsis material and knew that I wanted it to be different. I wanted it to be more of a progressive, more heavy. We tried to kind of stick with who some of these past members were, the original drummer. And we knew the cello was not going to work for it. So I sought out a guitarist. That's how I met Mike. Mike has been with the band since the beginning of what has become, what became, I should say, Aziola Cry. So we found him through an ad. The only thing that caught my eye on his ad is he said something about how he likes Dream Theater. And I got to be honest, I'm not the biggest Dream Theater fan, but at least I knew that was the direction. I knew, okay, somebody who appreciates them will definitely be more into the progressive thing that I wanted to do. So we had Mike join us, and we kept the same drummer. The first drummer was just not a progressive rock drummer. And we kind of knew it, but we worked around it. There was a lot of electronics included in that album, so that kind of masked a little bit of his drumming style with adding that. And then, actually, the album came out, and he never played a show with us after that. So we then moved into drummer from an old rock band of mine. I used to live in the Detroit area, and so he was living in Detroit as well. I asked him if he could fill in. And he ended up just filling in for a little longer than we anticipated because he recorded our EP, Ghost Conversations, with us. And we played for quite a bit. But ultimately, that was an issue of distance. He was living in Detroit. We were in Chicago. We were making it work for a year or two. And we knew we had to get somebody here locally. We had our eyes on Tommy for a long time. In fact, we had asked him, and he was just really busy with other projects at the time. Okay. And then the stars aligned for a festival we did. And we knew that our previous drummer was not going to be able to do it. And yet we did not want to turn it down. So we asked Tommy if he could sit in, and it just kind of started from there. And he's been with us ever since. So.
Oh man. So that's what gave you guys the birth warble.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it. He's a great drummer.
Yeah, he is a great drummer. We've wanted him in the band for a while, and that was actually the sound that I heard, and we were getting really close to it, but we're not achieving it until this album. This is the album that I feel like this is what I wanted us to sound like, and it needed Tommy's drumming to make it happen.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have discovered you now. And I mean that in the very best way. Going back and listening to some of the things, I can definitely hear the skeleton of Aziola Cry. But it's nothing like where you are today. And today, it's like not only are you wearing probably some influences on your sleeve, but you've found a voice that is really uniquely yours, and the transitions and the way you take the pieces of music has a much more confident feel to it. It sounds very cohesive, very practiced, very well written, very well arranged. It just sounds great. And being a prog guy, I hate that term, but being a prog guy, it's a perfect meal.
Yeah. I think it took those other albums to get to this point. I can't dismiss them in the journey that has been the band. But yeah, I look back on them, and in fact, I don't really, we've stopped playing material from Ellipsis quite a while ago. And we were playing Ghost Conversations 3 because I feel like it was somewhat kind of alluding to where we were heading, that last piece on that album. So it's the closest one, I feel, to where we wanted to go, which is this Ironic Divide album. So to me, that's the material that I want to promote, and kind of this. It's almost a new starting point for the band, I would say. That's where we all begin again, kind of a thing, and we can kind of leave the old material behind a little bit because of that, because I feel like this is the album that we really this is our sound.
Yeah. And isn't it cool that the last song on the last album sort of leads right into the next phase of who you are? I love how those sort of happy accidents that aren't accidents at all.
Yeah. That's really what happened, though. It happened on both albums, though, because if you look at Ellipsis 3, which is the last album, that was the one that kind of showed more of the progressive side of that whole album, the true progressive side. It has acoustic interlude. It has all these things happening in it. And so it was the starting point for where we were heading with Ghost Conversations. But then part 3 of Ghost Conversations is really where it was like, okay, it gave us a taste of what we wanted to sound like. And we kind of got there, but not really until this album.
Yeah. As a musical niche, progressive rock, progressive metal, whatever you want to call it, has a, smaller audience. This is a nice way to put it, right? When it comes to playing music in this world and making your statement, does Aziola Cry, do you have an agenda? Are you trying to be the next Dream Theater, the next Animals as leaders? Or are you saying, we are who we are, we do what we do, and we love what we love, and you're going to have to deal with it?
I would say maybe a little bit of my, I don't know if I want to call it stubbornness, but
that's pretty great already. I can see in your face. See, the listeners can't hear, but I can see in your face. I can see you go, let's see, I want to be rich and I want to be famous and I want to do what I love.
Yeah. Because I think ultimately at the end of the day, I like what I like, and that doesn't necessarily always correspond with what everybody else does or what I know is popular. So, I mean, even sometimes within the band, like, they will ask, like, can't you just write something that doesn't have to do this? Like,
right. Or being at 11.
Yeah. I mean, some of the stuff that it goes overboard, even like where we're playing all different odd time signatures within sections. It's like, why do I have to do that? And I think really at the end of the day, it's because I love the challenge of the music. I love, and that to me is what keeps driving it. So I would say that because that's my number one thing, that is really where most of it comes from. And so that stubbornness of wanting to stay that path is really, it'll either be the death of me or I feel like a few years ago when we did Ghost Conversations, much more than a few years now, but I don't think there was a lot of music out there that sounded like that. I feel like in the last few years, there's been a lot more bands, you mentioned like Animals as leaders, that they're doing their thing instrumental like that it allows us a little bit more freedom, because now I don't want to necessarily sound like them, but because we're also instrumental, we're also heavy like that, I think there's a little bit more of an audience for it, which is kind of what I'm sticking with what we're doing. Hopefully we'll just grab some of those people, kind of find us and say, it's different, but I like what they're doing too.
Yeah.
That's kind of.
Yeah. I mean, your band, you are a dream guest because you're exactly what my audience wants and listens to. I mean, Aziola Cry, I can't wait to see what happens, because your stuff is perfect. I mean, like, I read as I was sort of working on this, I read, you had gone through a few drummers, and again, I'm not gonna disparage your current drummer because he's great, but everything in my brain was like, this is perfect music. And if you ever lose that guy, like if he just decides he wants to retire, please call me, because I will literally, I mean, I've got a wife and 3 kids at home, dude. And I'm 55, so I'm old and crazy, but I will freaking move to Chicago to be in your band. It is so good. And it's musically challenging, but it's also, there's a fulfilling aspect to what you're doing, and when I asked you that last question, I almost answered it myself and saying, I do what I do because I can.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of coming back to we have said, actually, if Tommy were to ever leave, that would probably be the end. So it's good to know. Okay. There is the next phase, and it involves you.
Yeah. And I can do it too. I mean, I'm just planting the seed just now. I'm sorry, Tommy. I love you, dude. I don't even know you, and you're a great drummer, but you know, if you get COVID or something, I'm on my way. Poor Tommy.
Yeah. That's awesome. So
you should see his smile right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I don't know. I think what we're doing, and kind of to one of the points you made, I think what we're doing is it's gratifying for us because of the complexity of it. It's just fun to play. Sometimes I say the problem with this is like it's doing a 45-minute long math problem, and that could be, draining on the brain. Like you play this music and then sometimes you're exhausted and need to take a nap afterwards because it's like you've just done so much thinking. But I also feel like that's the part that appeals to the musicians, like yourself. I also feel like, and this is what I don't think sometimes people get, is I try to write it with a feeling of verse, chorus, like a little bit of something that people can attach to. Because one of the things I don't necessarily love about instrumental music is that sense of constant noodling, constant note that can take you out of the song because it doesn't really give you anything to grasp onto and feel something.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. And so I feel like that's something that we do well. And I hope people get that, is that not even musicians can grab onto it and say like, oh, I like that because I like that riff, or it doesn't have a vocalist singing over the top of it, but I like the music that's happening. And that's kind of what I'm going for, versus that need to constantly have the guitarist be playing a million notes over everything, where sure, the guitarist in the audience liked it, but nobody else necessarily did.
Yeah. To me, the problem with progressive music in general, whether it's metal or jazz or, just anything, is that usually the band comes up with a very, very cool idea that, the hook that brings the audience in, brings the listener in, but then they mess with it, or they never come back to the hook. Dream Theater's famous for writing these incredibly cool hooks and then abandoning them. And there's no theme. And what I like about your stuff, and I really hope you break in that way, is that there is this cohesive thing that's happening. And yes, the song goes on a journey, but you bookend things really well. And that is the difference to me. And I'm not trying to say you're a better songwriter than the guys in Dream Theater, but you do have this desire to make, a piece, a traditional, if you will, standalone song that just doesn't have a singer in it. Right? I mean, another guy that that does that very well is oh my God! See, I'm so out of it today, I can't even think of it. Flying in a Blue Dream.
Joe Satriani.
Yes, Satriani. Satriani plays a song for the song.
Right.
Yeah, he can noodle all day, but he doesn't. And the problem with musicians is we're all about masturbation. We're all about the musical masturbation. Look what I can do. Look at how big my junk is. Check this out. By the way, I'm going to take you over here. I'm going to leave you over here in a closet. I'm never going to come back to you. And I'm going to go, right? It's just, we're bonkers because we're schizophrenic. And so we write schizophrenic music, and then we expect everybody to be okay with it. And no wonder we don't go anywhere.
Yeah, no, I think that was really, really my intent is to move away from that. And I think, maybe subconsciously, I don't even know if I would have thought of this, but like, I am a product of listening to Joe Satriani. I was into him from the get-go of him and that kind of thing, with whether it be like as a bass player, I was into Stu Hamm, and Stu Hamm was kind of simultaneously doing the same albums with Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. Those guys were kind of coming out with all that kind of stuff. Tony McAlpine was another one like that. Those original albums were kind of where I started my music. And so I always liked that you could listen to those. They were, like you said, songs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those guys can play unbelievable, but you can't deny that there weren't great songs there as well and anybody could kind of listen to and also enjoy, not just the musicians. I don't think that you listen to Surfing with the Alien and some of the songs, like I'm going to blank right now, but one of the greatest songs on that is Always With Me, Always With You.
Yeah.
But I love that song. Yes. And yet it's really because it's a great song. It's not, I mean, sure, he plays over the top of it, but even that, it's more of a melodic solo. It's not him showcasing how fast he could play or doing any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so for me, that was always maybe subconsciously more than I was thinking of those guys as I started writing music, but it definitely plays a role that I enjoy listening to that a heck of a lot more than I enjoy listening to something where the guitarist starts at note one and ends at the very end of it, and the entire time was just a flurry of notes and how fast I could play. It just never appealed to me. So, and I'm coming from a musician standpoint. So if I can't imagine somebody who doesn't know how to play an instrument enjoying that.
Yeah. I don't understand noisy guitar solos for that matter. I don't understand when guitar players are sort of just raking over the strings, and not to diss anyone in particular, but I will name one. Kirk Hammett is famous for basically just playing lots of notes and it doesn't go anywhere. And of course, the one famous solo he played, which is in the video recording of the Metallica album, that came out in 90, the Black Album, is Nothing Else Matters. That solo is beautiful, but it's because Bob Rock said, stop being a wanker and just play the freaking song, right? Because guys like George Lynch, they're all over the map. There's no beauty, there's no flow to what they're doing, and that's why I like Eric Johnson and Steve Vai. Even Steve Vai plays kind of too many notes, but he still understands how to get back to the root, right? Yeah. And then you mentioned Stu Hamm. If I could just briefly say, Stu Hamm's performance on the Rush tribute Working Man is mind-blowing. That is mind-blowing. And the bass tone on Anthem is like God's bass tone. That is the best sounding bass I've ever heard in my life. Yeah,
he's great. Did you happen to see when he toured with Billy Sheehan and Jeff Berlin? They did that B3 tour. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but they're all such immense players, man. Yeah. Your music is, if I could use the word, malleable. And the reason I wrote this down and I'm thinking of it this way is because, to me as a listener, your music doesn't just take me on a journey. It allows me to craft and to sculpt in my brain what it means. And I haven't experienced this a lot. When you approach songwriting, what is the key focus for you? Are you looking to convey to the audience a specific feeling, or are you looking to take them on a big trip, right? Like saying, like, I'm starting in the spring, I'm going to summer, I'm going to fall, and then winter. What's your MO?
I would say it's more of the latter. So what I used to do is be so ambiguous with kind of the idea that I think it was lost on people. People had no idea what I was trying to do. And this album, I was a little bit more forthcoming, and I think it worked. Yeah. But the way I would love to do it is just that I don't have to necessarily feed anybody the story, because I really want it to be an individual story for every individual.
Stand alone.
Yeah. So I think that if I could just simply put it out there and maybe just kind of, give a word or two as to kind of the idea behind it, that would be ideal. But I did find that by feeding a little bit more, because a lot of the press that came out, I mentioned, it was a person's final demise. It was, so I started giving some more of, this is what it was about. And then with each video, I kind of alluded a little bit more to where it was supposed to be going, but still intentionally very vague. I mean, using that character as the character and using a lot of symbolism with regard to whether it be the deer or in the latter one, the wings with those are intentionally vague because I really want the listener to create their own version of what this means. So I would say that ideally I wouldn't have even have given that much, but I think it's helped. I feel like by telling a little bit more of it, at least it set people kind of into like where I was intending it to go. Now, how they interpret it and they kind of internalize that's up to the individual to do. But at least it's a starting point. I feel like when I would just kind of put these things out, and whether people know it, Ellipsis was the story of loss. It was supposed to be that Ellipsis was alluding to the thing that's missing. And Ghost Conversations was the direct sequel to that, which was having that moment of redemption and being able to have one last time with whatever it was that you were lost. But like, I'm telling you that now, nobody got that.
Sure.
And so I probably should have fed a little bit more of that at the time, and I should have given, because I think that without that, people they don't have a direct connection to it because they don't know what it is that it's supposed to be. It's just simply a musical thing and a title. Like I was saying before, some of these goofy titles, maybe they mean something to somebody, but some of them, they just sound so, I don't think there was, I think they just came up both with funny titles and to instrumental music. And because that's not how I think, everything has a very purposeful meaning behind it. I think by telling a little bit more of that, it was helpful this time, because I think that kind of gave people a starting point for where to take their mind and their own journey.
Yeah, no, that's a great description and a great explanation. It makes me think about David Lynch. People love mystery. They love the idea of seeing a movie with a mystery, but what they don't want is ambiguity when it comes to the ending. They want to know why. Why did you take me here? And, you mentioned these song titles, these goofy song titles from all these different people, Bubblegum Hurricane and, Tampax, you know what I mean? It's like, what the heck does that mean? Is this a end of the world kit? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what is it? It's interesting how that works and how important it is to give the audience a sense of structure and direction, and at the same time let them come back with their sort of mild interpretations. But if you leave them to their own devices, everybody has a different POV, and as cool as that might be, the reality is it alienates almost everyone, because they want to know, what the hell are you saying? And I read, when I heard the name of the album, I'm coming with a question, I promise. When I heard the name of the album, the very first thing I thought of before I saw anything about it, before I read any of your write-ups on it or even the song titles, is, oh, this album is about America falling apart. Which proves my point that we're making it about us, right? I'm not saying, what is Jason trying to get me to think, or what kind of journey is he going to take me on? I'm saying, oh, well, I hate Trump, or oh, I hate Biden, or I hate this, or I hate that. And it must be about that. It's about, our culture falling apart. How ironic is that? I mean, you see what I'm saying? The petty, simple definitions are never correct.
Well, it's funny you say that, because before the album came out, I actually considered changing the title, because I thought to myself, I do not want people to misperceive this as exactly what you just said. I thought exactly that, like, because of the world we live in now is about that divide, and that is what people are going to think first and foremost. I thought, if people take it there, then they're missing everything that I wanted to do with this. And so I actually considered changing the title, but then I started realizing that a lot of the things that I've done, the titles, if you start to think like that and you have that in your brain, you can start to misperceive every single thing I've done.
Yes.
And so then I thought, well, wait a minute. If I can now play that game and turn every album I've done into a political album, of which none of it's political, then I'm going to be stuck trying to, come up with any sort of titles moving forward. So I just decided at the end of the day, no, it is what it is. People might misperceive it, and that's fine, because I'm going to give them a little bit more of the story and let them know it has nothing to do with what you may have thought it was.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Texas Sharpshooter theory?
No. What is it?
Okay, so it's the idea that it's a theory, right? It's the idea that if you get far enough away from a target, everything has hit it. So if I have, from 50 yards away, I have an archery target, and I'm shooting arrows at it, and I'm hitting all the outside edges. I'm not hitting that red dot in the middle. It's not very good, right? But if I go back a mile, I can't really tell, but I do know that every arrow has hit the target. And so my brain says, oh, well, see, I did a great job, right? From a distance, everything looks correct is the point of the Texas Sharpshooter theory. And that's how it kind of works, when something's interpretive, like art. Paintings. People walk up to a painting and say, "Oh, it evokes, a feeling of melancholy and perhaps a drowning in the Sea of Cortez." And you're like, "No, dude, it's about a bowl of fruit."
Right.
Right. It just and so this whole conversation, and actually my research prior, as I looked this up, and then I decided to read about it. And I was like, oh, like, it's not what I thought at all.
Well, were you disappointed? Did you want it to be a political statement?
I didn't want it to be a political statement as much as I wanted to be right.
Oh, okay.
which is, but again, it goes back to the way we are as people. I talk about this a lot too, but I always use Radiohead as an example of a band that the first two albums, they were Radiohead. And then they released OK Computer, which, of course, to us nowadays, looking back, whether you're a fan or not, you go, oh, wow, I mean, that's Radiohead at the top of their game. But that is 23 years ago, and they don't even play songs off of that album. And they evolved into something, honestly, I don't like, even kind of. And yet there's a following that says kind of they can do no harm, right? And my thinking, of course, of all this is I owned Radiohead when Radiohead wasn't big. They were mine. They were for me, and now they've become for the world, and that bothers me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And so I know this is a big round arguing statement of ideas, but the point being is that I think the listener in general bites onto something because we feel like it was made for us. We feel like we're correct in how we interpret it. And we can't wait to see what else you do with the thing that fed us in the first place. We don't want you to take it into your own pool. We want it in our pool.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And I worked at a record store for many years when I was younger, and we were really big on that. Like when we discovered a band, they were our band. Yes. And the minute we started selling records at our record store, and you saw who came in and bought it, all of a sudden it was like, that's not my band anymore, because they ruined it for me. These people are coming. So I totally get that. Now, with regard to the story, though, I don't know. I'm torn because I want people to have that personal connection to it. I want them to feel that it was talking directly to them. But if I don't feed a little bit of that storyline, then I think it's just I don't think they get it enough to even care enough about it. So it's kind of this, it's a fine line, I guess. And maybe that's where, some of the titles that I come up with and everything, I just put so much thought and time and energy into them that I want there to be some payoff, at least on a personal level, that you follow me to a certain extent with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see that where like somebody like if you had an entirely different notion and then you realize that it was not it at all, it's probably a little bit of a letdown where you're thinking like, oh, this isn't what I thought this was about.
Right. Well, I mean, I equate it to, and this isn't a religious thing, but I equate it to like reading the Bible. You could sit down, you can read a verse in the Bible and be like, oh man, wow, that really hits me. Like it touches me spiritually or something like that. Right. And then you go home and you go to your wife and you go, hey babe, I just read this really cool thing. And it's totally like hitting me in the gut right where I'm at right now. And then you pull it out, you read it and you go like, wait a minute, did I get the verse wrong? Like it's like, in other words, where you're at that particular moment, going back to the Texas Sharpshooter theory is how you feel. It doesn't necessarily mean it's so. That's where I came up with the malleability of you, and what you're doing is it fits the moment for me right now, and it changes tomorrow. That's what's so great about it, Jason.
Yeah, and I think that's where I do leave the ambiguity to it, because I do want there to be, if on the surface what it is just a decline, it's a falling out of sorts, that there's still a lot there. It doesn't necessarily have to be. In fact, somebody was asking me, well, does this mean that this person is a serial killer? And I said, maybe that's where your mind went with it. And bad to you goes to that direction. But bad and doing something that is perceived by society as not acceptable, that runs a wide gamut.
Yes.
And so that is where I want to leave that ambiguity there. So that to certain people, what that means. And again, I guess, could you take it as a political thing even? Yeah, you could move that into the political realm. Mm-hmm. It was not a political statement, I could say that, but it was a statement of just things going wrong for somebody. And I think all of us can relate to that on some level.
Yeah.
And I think that was where people can kind of take that malleability to it and just kind of like, oh, for me, this is where I kind of come in with what something going bad in my life means. And for this person, it means something different.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm so glad that you said what you said in the beginning of this conversation, because you talked about, all the things that are going on in the lives of the band. And it makes so much sense why this piece of music would be the way it is, the way it sounds and the way it feels. It's very personal and intimate. My favorite track, if I may be so bold, is called Hollow Reflections, I believe is the title. Yeah. I want to say it's the third track. Second. Okay. Yeah. There's something special about it. And I'm not saying that the others are great. Don't get me wrong. But for me, it was the one that hit me a bit. And I think it's because as the piece got busier, as the piece moved along, it got busier. But then at the end, it had this sort of mellow section that released me. And I loved that. It felt like a movie. You talk about cinematic. That was a very cinematic piece. What is that piece about? Now that I can ask, like, can you define it for me? Can you tell me what that piece means?
Yeah. So that hollow reflection is kind of looking at yourself and not seeing who you think you see. You're not the version of yourself that you believed existed is not there. So in the storyline, it's this moment where there's a lot of thought going on in the character. If you want to take it into the storyline, it's where there's there's still hope if you want to kind of look at this as a bad and a good, just a simple, take it down to a simple standpoint. There's still good there, but the character's starting to see less of that in them, and they're starting to feel a little bit more despair as to who they are. But there's still a sense of the original version of this person is existent still. So that's kind of the idea behind it. One of the things I did with the song is because it had that reflection, I wanted there to be a representation musically within that. So that's why when you say we start and we end somewhat, it's almost, the song itself is almost a mirror itself, because it kind of folds up on itself, with that middle being kind of the middle. I don't know how to describe it, but it very much is this reflection of itself within the song. So that was somewhat intentional to kind of get that vibe of the introspection, the character kind of grappling with who they are.
There it is. That's a good word, grappling. That's exactly what the song, it actually reminded me a lot of the 4-album suite by Devin Townsend that has Addicted and Deconstruction. Yeah. This sounded like the bridge between those two albums. I don't know if you're familiar with those two albums.
Yeah.
But that 4-song cycle is Devin Townsend's life story, basically. Mm-hmm. And yeah, now that I know about your sort of personal struggles and the things that you're writing about, it makes sense that would be the bridge.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. the and Cowards is the beginning, again, I'm going to simplify it down to good and bad. There's good. There's good there.
Yeah.
This is the moment of introspection that leads to the Ironic Divide, which is the next song, where there is that decline beginning.
Yeah.
So,
wow. I mean, it just actually leaves me speechless, and it makes sense. And I'm glad I interpreted it at least kind of on the path that you were intending. I'm assuming those sort of bass parts are all you on the Warr.
Yeah. That's where the song starts with, is things like that bass line becomes the starting point for where we're going to take things. Out of curiosity, do you think you like that song just because there is a lot of drums in the middle of it?
Okay. You probably got me on that. Oh, I mean, I think as a drummer, sure. I mean, as a listener, I mean, I want to listen to the whole thing. I want to sit down and actually just listen to it through, because I heard it in bits and pieces as when I first got the record, when we set this up. Yeah, probably. I think that's, what's always going to draw me in is this sort of the rhythmic feel of something. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense with what's going on melodically, and specifically arrangement stuff? The keys of any song to me are, do the passages make sense? Are you throwing on a 17th bar just because, or does the resolution need to be extended a bit, right? It's just, I'm thinking about it musically because I'm a musician. So I guess that's a great question from you, because yes, I love drums.
Yeah, that one in particular has that moment where Tommy goes kind of nuts. And I could see that being something that would appeal to you. Yeah,
I could tell. It's funny because as soon as I said, "Oh, I really like Hollow Reflections," I saw your face go like, "Oh, dude, come on, seriously."
Well, it's
really, that's the one. Great,
Well, it's the shortest song. It's I would say from a song structure, though, it might be the most because again, it kind of like reflects on itself. It's traditionally speaking, it does not have a song structure quite like a normal song would. And some of the other ones, I have a little bit more of that traditional structure involved in it. So that one also, I think when you said that, I thought, oh, that's interesting, because that one really, like, people have referred to that as like our avant-garde song even, because it doesn't have anything that is a little bit more of what you've come to expect from a song.
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly fair, and it's true. You know, having heard the other pieces, it is definitely the one. It's the outlier. But again, I think just being a player and a listener, yeah, I like the journey it takes me on, and I like the resolution. I like that it's leading me to the next track. I think that's really important. The album came out in March, if I have my notes correct.
End of March 26th.
Yeah. How's the public reception, critical reception? How's it all going?
It's been great. I think it's. I'm always surprised when we get these great reviews. I want to say I'm surprised with a great review. That sounds horrible, but I'm glad that people are getting it.
Yeah.
I don't always think that this music is the type of thing that everybody's going to, and I understand that. I go into this 100% aware that there are going to be people that are going to say, I don't get it. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. But they were never going to get it, Jason. They were never going to get it.
Right. Yeah. And so I know that. So the fact that there's been so many great reviews and that people have just been kind of coming out of the woodwork and showing a lot of support, and the emails that we receive and the social media, the people that are interacting with us there have been so positive. It's been really great. So it's reassuring to know that there are people that are getting it. Yeah. And that's what's cool, because when you get somebody who really, really loves what you're doing, it kind of, to me, is like, wow, they got it, and they totally get what we're trying to do, and it's just, everything's working. So it's a good feeling.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I want you to be massively successful. I'm just so grateful that you would allow me to even be a little part of your world right now. You know, this is a real big deal for me, and very exciting, because I feel like you really are actually something new. You know, I'll end the front part of this with, I got a few fun little silly questions to finish up with, but you know, if I could just espouse on this, is you've made something special. And what I love about it is, going back to the phrase I used earlier, it's not masturbatory, and not to knock the tools of the world, you know, bands that are really trying to do something. But you don't take me on this overly long journey. It seems that you've figured out how to be succinct in your storytelling. And sure, yeah, you have, you know, these epic pieces, and that's fine. I mean, it's expected, you know, but there's nothing false about it. There's nothing, it doesn't sound like you're trying. It sounds like you're being, and that is a big deal. And why I would even want to toss my own personal hat into the ring, you know, simply because it's just incredible music. It has to be a blast to play. And I really do wish you all the best successes, and that things really pop for you. My final sort of musical question is what's your dream tour? Who do you go out on the road with?
Ooh, I let me think about the band, but I'm going to say I always thought of this band as being the perfect warm-up band, though, for so many, because of it being instrumental. I think bands sometimes don't want somebody to step on their toes, or there's that natural competition that kind of happens. At least I know, like, on a local level, there's you know, that feeling of, you know, being blown away on stage or whatever. And so I think when you have bands that kind of have similarities or whatever, it gets a little harder. I always thought we were the perfect warm-up band, because I don't think we're necessarily competing with anybody.
Yeah.
What we're doing is always going to be just a little different, even if it's, you know, maybe metal, maybe we share the metal, or maybe we share the progressive aspect of things. It's just always going to be a little different. So I thought that it would be the perfect warm-up band for anybody, really, because we would just gel well with anybody. In terms of a perfect I guess I would have to probably just go with bands that I like. Maybe, I don't know. What would be perfect? I really like Between the Buried and Me.
Yes.
I think we would be great as a warm up act for them.
Yeah. I hate the idea though of you. I mean, I understand why you're saying it, but I hate the idea of you being a warm up act, right? Like that's another one of those things that as I own in my spirit, the things you're creating, it pisses me off.
I thought that was the question though. We warm up for somebody.
No. I mean, no, just like a dream tour. Like who do you go out with? I mean, but also, I mean, look, to be fair, you would be a warm up act for anybody that went out that, you know what I mean? Right. They're going to be bigger and, you know, more experienced.
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably the band that comes to my mind first.
Okay.
And maybe it's also just because yesterday they announced Colors too.
Yes.
And so it's top of mind, but I think that would be an exciting tour to go on. And they typically, another thing I like about them is they get good warm-up acts. I think they tour with other bands that are unique and doing something different and don't necessarily look for what is expected every time. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about them.
No, that's great. And I think you're reading my mind a bit too, because the band that I would love to see you tour with was one of their warm-up acts, and that's Leprous.
Oh, yeah.
I think Leprous and Rendezvous Point and Leprous are my two favorite, not you included, of course, two favorite progressive bands at the moment. It's interesting too that they both feature, you know, Bord Kolstad on drums because he's a freaking monster player. But I would love to see you with Leprous. They're getting ready to go out, later in the year, early next year, I think. And, you know, they just released their first single on the new record today. Yeah. So talk to your management or whoever does your booking and see if you can get the American leg of the tour, because, man, I would love to see you in Seattle, and I don't want to have to fly to Chicago to bump into you. Unless I'm going to be in the band, in which case then it's cool.
Yeah, we'll get working on that.
Yeah. You're out of here, buddy. You're out of here, Tommy.
I'm going to work on that.
I'm serious too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely going to reach out and get working on that, because that would be great. I love that band as well. So that would be perfect.
Good. Perfect. Okay. So
we'll see you in Seattle.
Yes.
On the Leprous tour. Yes.
Thank you. I have a couple of silly questions to end this so we can have a little fun time really quick. Okay. Here's one of my favorite questions. What do you wish you knew back in the day?
Oh, there's so much. It's interesting. I think that unfortunately when we're kids, we're so naive with so many things, and you grow up and all of a sudden I equate it to kind of like everything just all of a sudden fell in my lap and made sense. All the nonsense that I did for many years, and it just all of a sudden made sense. And I think maybe a little bit of that starts with the birth of my daughter. All of a sudden, life just made way more sense that before that it just didn't. So I guess to answer the question, I would say is, if I had to say something specifically, it would be all the things that when I was a kid that I dwelled on or maybe got upset about, or I don't know, even I think about some of the things that, ruined my day, ruined my month, ruined my year. All of that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And like, even I think about, we talk about bullying and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't even remember any kids' names when I was young. I don't remember any statements that were made to me. And these are all the things that tore me apart at the time and maybe made me, and yet it means so little later on in life. So if you could just kind of go back and realize that none of this is going to matter 10, 15 years from now, you won't even know this kid's name. Like, just walk away. Like, I think that's the thing that I wish I could have kept with me when I was younger, because it would have saved a whole lot of days of worrying about or doing things. I think look back and it's just like so much nonsense to it. It really, what a waste of time.
Yeah, no, that's right up there, man. Don't take anything personally, right?
Yeah.
That's great. What skill do you wish you had learned?
Skill I wish I would have learned. Well, my life is a little bit of a, so when I'm not playing music, I started many years kind of going down a path, a job path, that I one day just woke up and realized, like, why am I doing this? I don't even like this. I don't want to say anything about that job because there's probably people that do it. So I'll just hold off on saying that. But I just realized that it wasn't for me. And I didn't even understand why I was in it, because it almost felt bad doing it even. It just wasn't me. And then I was very fortunate. I went back to school and became a teacher. And so I wish that when I was younger, I would have realized that I enjoy teaching as much as I enjoy it now. And I could have done that just a lot earlier, because there's something about teaching that's just so fulfilling, and seeing the growth of whoever it is you're teaching, children, to me, that is rewarding, where I spent way too many years in my life doing something that was so unrewarding that I wish I would have just gained that skill. And then I would have had so many more years of experience, and just, I wish I could have done that.
Yeah. Well, that leads into my last question, which is, what did your parents teach you that you ignored?
That I ignored. I think I'm so much the product of my parents and the hard work and all that stuff, that I'm trying to think I think I ignored a lot of things when I was younger, but I think as I've gotten older, I think I've used every single thing that they've taught me and realized that, boy, I should have just listened a lot earlier. How nice would that have been? In terms of ignoring, I think that hard work was probably, and again, me today is a very hardworking person, but I think that I ignored it for far too long. I think I just kind of, my parents used to say that, trying to think of a way to say this that doesn't sound ridiculous, but basically I had a horseshoe, that a lot of things always kind of fell my way. And it wasn't always because I worked hard to achieve it. And so when all of a sudden I started realizing, wait a minute, not everything just falls in my lap. Wait, what's happening here? I have to work hard. I wish I would have kind of started that a little bit sooner, because then it would have been nice to have the work ethic that I currently have a little earlier on in life.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer, man. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Blake from Aziola Cry. The new album, Ironic Divide's been out since March. Go buy it. Jason, do me a favor quickly and tell us where we can get the album, and tell us where we can get your merch.
We'll start with aziolacry.com. I always spell that name because not everybody's going to know. AZIOLACRY.com. And you can find everything there. There's links off of that. But our record label is Sensory Records, which is a division of Laser's Edge. So you can get all of that there. That's lasercd.com. That's where you could buy the CD itself. They also have their digital downloads, which would be through their Bandcamp, or you could just basically go to the Laser's Edge website. Let me think. I think that's probably where you can get most of it, between Laser's Edge and our own site.
That's so cool. Links. Well, I'll make sure that I include all your social media links as well with this, but I want to thank you, man. You're a super cool guy. You write incredible music. I'm absolutely in love with. I promise not to talk about the fact that I want to replace your drummer anytime soon. And everybody's going to listen to this and going to be like, dude, shut up. But it really is great stuff. All my buddies are going to be going crazy for it. I know my listeners are going to love it. So thank you so much for your time. This was really, really cool. A great way to end the week. Thank you so much, my friend. And let's talk soon, okay?
Appreciate it. Oh, for sure. Really appreciate it.